being overconfident? Am I becoming complacent about complacency?
I think you are.
Oh, he's not the Messiah. He's just a very naughty boy.
Yeah, I've got big ears.
Brian just want to see anyone. Piss off.
That's the one, because you literally complete me, and we complete each other.
You've obviously encountered discrimination in your own life by virtue of being Australian. So,
Hey, Manuel Camp was a real pissant who was very rarely stable.
I don't want to get too gushy, but I might just be saying you complete me, Dean. PNG now stands for Pritchard and Good.
Branding is not a bad blind date.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
did I do that?
You're insane!
Well, hello everybody from Broadway, and I'm not sure what the cross street is, but I'm at H&H Bagels. Why am I at H&H Bagels? Because no one else is at H&H Bagels these days. Where is everybody? Everybody seems to be deserted. They've deserted New York City. They've deserted H&H Bagels. But fear not, my guest today might have an antidote for that. He might have the new H&H Bagels, but, you know, in Connecticut. It's a long story, but we will get to it shortly. Here's what you need to know. It's Flannel Day. It's National Flannel Day, and I'm not sure, is this technically flannel? I'm not really sure, but this is all I possess except for pajama bottoms or pants that are flannelly, shall we say. And there's a little bit of green in here, so the green screen, you know, I might be holy today. You might start seeing right through me. But anyway, wear your flannels and show off with your flannels, and you know, just be loud and proud. Mr. Tom Morris is here. He says eagerly present, ready for hope, positivity, and optimism. And if there's time, a little bit of marketing. My mom is here. Wouldn't be the same without you. Yeah, we were almost a little bit late today. Here is my own comment saying maybe a few minutes late today, because, you know, ultimately, here's the thing. You know, when you have old people on the show, they're not so good with technology. Now I should talk because I'm old too. You know, I got my AARP welcome kit. But George Tannenbaum, look at the sparkle in his eyes. There is nothing old about this man. He is young at heart. He is young in the eyes. He's young in the lips. Even his hair is indicating youth, because otherwise he would be bald. He is the chief George officer of GeorgeCo, and you're going to find out all about his story. Now, Ann Bowman says Nutella needs to sponsor the show. Should I just go on every single day and keep, you know, doing this? Nutella, spread the happy. Should I just keep doing that until eventually they sponsor the show? I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. But here is Henk Kampfer, corner of 80th and Broadway. He corrects me as well. I miss you, Henk. You need to come back on one of our community shows. But today you're going to be hearing from George Tannenbaum. And then tomorrow is David Burkus. Just a couple of little tweaks for you to be aware of. One is it's going to be at 12:30 p.m. instead of 12. And we're going to do the after show on Clubhouse, exclusively on Clubhouse. But don't worry, our regulars, we will still simulcast it on Zoom. You can still Zoom in and see everyone and hang out, etc. But we really are going to try and focus on having myself and my guest in Clubhouse. We'll make it work. We're experimenting here. Why not? We're young-ish, you know. And then on Friday, community show, I just heard that Jeremy Tucker may not be coming in, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of sideways movement, maybe substitution. But, you know, when you got Lee Oden, Sharon Nielsen, David Rendell, and Peter Shankman, you don't need to have a problem about finding, space to insert words, because words matter. And these people have a lot of words. And just remember that words matter. We're going to come back to that. So happy birthday, Marty St. George. I think I met him when he was at JetBlue. Sean Womack. Who else? Nancy Schenker, Corey Cronengold, Leith Weitzman, Mohan. My God, Mohan, we haven't seen each other in so long. And then on LinkedIn, there's Andrea Kidd, Gabby Rose, Molly Montgomery, Tsepo Magabe. Happy birthday to all of you, wherever you may be. Well, let's get into our seated soliloquy. And can you tell I'm enthusiastic? Can you tell that I'm enthused? This is a subject that I haven't spoken about really much, and I'm just so excited to share it with you. You know, when I asked George Tannenbaum what he wanted to promote, one of the things was, quote, the primacy of passion. I've worked with 10 geniuses or Hall of Famers in my life. Their enthusiasm is what makes them special. Okay, so make that 11 geniuses because you have to include George. I was struck by a word that in 200 plus appearances or episodes of CoronaTV has not really cropped up much, if at all, and that word is enthusiasm. I remember the great Winston Churchill. I mean, I didn't know him personally, but his quote was, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. But I want to go deeper on this. George connects passion and enthusiasm together. They're different and yet they're similar. To understand enthusiasm, perhaps we need to recognize its counterpart, which I suspect would be cynicism, skepticism, being jaded, or maybe just lacking hope. To understand enthusiasm, I immediately think of a lapdog, loyal to a fault, filled with joy and a zest for life. Yes, the very theme of this show is all about enthusiasm in the form of hope, positivity, and optimism. Sure, we discuss some serious topics. We're not afraid to go there, but there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. There's always a will to keep moving, momentum, hopefully forward, but sometimes in different directions. To me, enthusiasm equates with joy, not happiness per se, but joy. Do you love what you do? Truly, madly, deeply love what you do? Does it feed your spirit? Does it fuel your life force? That is enthusiasm. Going into every project, encounter, or challenge as an adventure that tests, builds, and ultimately makes us smarter, wiser, more resilient, and more capable of handling the next challenge, and the one after that, and the one after that. This week, I presented to a large consumer packaged goods company, and they wanted to know what I thought was in store for 2021. I told them it would suck, just like 2020, maybe a little bit less so, but the difference would be that we are better prepared for it. I had a twinkle in my eye, just like George. I had a slight smirk on my mouth, the corners of my mouth, just like George. I had a spring in my step, just like George. The takeaway was simply this: no matter what life throws at us, we can handle it somehow, some way, hopefully together, but if necessary, by ourselves. As long as we have breath, we have the potential to approach anything, as best as we can, within our reach, within our ability. We can overcome it. And how can we not be enthused about that? Well, now it's time to bring on our guest, George Tannenbaum, the epitome, I think, of enthusiasm. And, he sent me, because he's a creative guy, a different kind of opening. So name George Tannenbaum, title, Chief George Officer, full-time dates employed, February 2020 to present, location, New York and the world. Little blurb about him. I was kicked out of Ogilvy at the age of 62 in January 2020. But really, I didn't leave Ogilvy. Ogilvy left me. The values and creativity and integrity of the agency had in the holding company era vanished like a fist when you open your hand. I started my own place with those values, creativity, and integrity, and the belief that every client deserves to work with a founder. I'm staying small so I can stay personal, and so every client can get me. That's why I've called the place GeorgeCo. It's all George all the time, and you're going to get all George all the time. Let's bring him on. Welcome, Chief George Officer.
Well, God, if my mother were alive, she might hate me a little less. So thank you for that introduction, Joe. I'm touched. I'm touched. You're
welcome, and I'm just so excited because that word enthusiasm, it just got me, it just got me so energized, because when you know how this is, when you see so much sameness in the world, when something is different, it just bursts out and hits you over the head and gives you a big kiss on the lips, and that's what the word enthusiasm did for me.
I read something a long time ago. I read constantly. I don't watch a lot of TV, and my way of kind of stopping my long work days and kind of repairing my mind from the world, especially the last years of the darkening age we've been living through, is to read. And I read eclectically, and I read all the time. I remember a few years ago, it was recommended by my therapist of almost 40 years. I'm on a postage stamp in Austria, by the way, supporting therapy since 1980. He recommended a book by an anthropologist called Desmond Morris, and it was called The Nature of Happiness. I'm doing this from memory, so I might not have everything exactly right. But what Desmond Morris famously in the 60s wrote a book called The Naked Ape, comparing some things in man, and I mean humans, not just man, that were really fundamental to our species. And, from the time we really emerged from trees. And what Desmond Morris talks about, which I found incredibly interesting, was that the pursuit of something often makes us more happy than the attainment of it. And he took us back to the African veldt. And when you formed a group to kill an animal, because you had to feed the tribe, so to speak, everyone would have a different task. There would be the faster runner would go ahead. They'd have people who flushed out the animal, people who threw the spear, so on and so forth. But that cohesion of coming together, of working together, of communicating across distance, of accomplishing something together is a weirdly joyous activity. And sometimes when you actually accomplish, in this case, and I'm not against the ethical treatment of animals, it's just a metaphor, the accomplishment of killing the wildebeest is a little bit of a letdown, because the chase, the togetherness, the group effort is so vital to humanity. It's so vital to what we do. And even in the later stages of my career, when I tended to work more as an individual, I didn't have a partner, that sort of thing, even then I felt very much like this is a group activity. We move towards things together, and we accomplish them together. And you have to keep running. And I know that's a little roundabout to talk about enthusiasm, but it's kind of the love of that chase that keeps us going. And in your intro, the portion about 10 geniuses, I've seen that in them. That I worked with Pitka, who claims to have shot 4,000 commercials. Yeah, he's a pain in the ass and he's a cranky old man, but he loves what he does. And there's something about that is just, you're the luckiest person on earth if you love what you do.
And then the question is, and it's funny how, by the way, you touched on so many aspects of that soliloquy, this idea of, I
actually listen sometimes.
I'm to synthesize pretty well and reframe, but the idea of together, the idea of it being a work in progress, the idea of it being part of an adventure, an ongoing adventure, the idea of momentum and keeping moving as opposed to stagnating or being static or being safe. There are so many aspects to
or
that.
chasing a fixed moment in time. Because you're making me think of kind of the fallacy of the award system is that you chase a moment in time. You chase something that's 2 years ago when you did the work, rather than it's reflective, not looking forward. And I think there's something perverted about that.
I think that it's funny because it's the one lesson as a parent that I've tried to instill in my kids, and not successfully, I might add, which is this idea of love the journey.
Right.
Love. Success is a journey, not a destination. I was taught that in my first job out of college at Nando's Chicken Land. This idea of the adventure, and that something's wrong, I guess, when you finally get the kill, when you finally get the award, when you finally reach the destination and it feels like a letdown, it feels like an anticlimax. That's when you know that you haven't actually savored everything that got you there, because it is a false idol, it is a false prophet, this idea of I made it, I reached the top. Now what? Guess what? The only place to go at that point is down.
Well, not to get all hoity-toity on you, but it was Ode on a Grecian Urn, right, is Keats. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard sweeter still is a pretty good summation of what you just said. It's kind of the imagination, the how could this be, and the arrival is almost invariably a letdown. There's a hair in the shower when you get to the 4-star hotel, as opposed to the fantasy of what it'll be like. But if you're only in it for the kind of to close the book on something, to get something done, I mean, I think that's a little incomplete, and a little bit you're resting a little bit on laurels, and laurels in our business, in the advertising business, are a little spurious, I think, because we're making commercials. I mean, we're not making literature.
What's the old saying? It's not rocket science, it's just advertising.
Yeah.
So Tom Morris says, we're evolved to seek and strive, not to sit on our laurels, and yet the laurels get all the attention. And Joey Dumont adds, I've heard it said that genuine happiness comes from having much to live for, not from having much to live on. And we will use that as a benchmark or a rubric to talk about, this current adventure that you're living through and living on. But first, I generally like to kind of find out a little bit more about my guests, and we set our private investigators into the field to find out a little bit about, the real George Tannenbaum. And
there might not be one.
No, here's what we found. You're a little bit of a hybrid beast, because the thing about you in your life was you were the prototypical early bird that got the worm, right? You were the first one in the morning. As you said, it's not a sleep pattern, it's an ethos. Now, being the chief George officer of GeorgeCo, do you still live this idea of being the first in? I guess that means the first out of bed in the morning.
My wife is kind of cut out of the same cloth in a lot of ways. But I like getting a handle on my day. I don't have any embarrassment to say aloud. When I worked in the agency world, there were times if I was busy or I needed to concentrate, and when you go open plan, concentrate doesn't really cut it. But I'd get in at 7:30, sometimes even earlier, and I would bang away. And by the time people started, rolling in at 9:30 or 10, I was done for the day. I mean, I had done a couple days' work in those 2 hours because, I was focused. I knew what I wanted to do. I was thinking about it on the way in, because I tend to walk a lot because it helps you. It's actually a thing in the Times about it last week. It helps you clarify. And, I had no problem kind of going. Of course, I wasn't allowed to go home because I worked for a holding company. But I had no problem kind of saying, look, I mean, I did my work today, and now that I'm an independent, and I'm working for my clients, I can produce an enormous amount of work. I'm not giving short shrift. That's not what I do. But you have, there's no bullshit in what I do. I don't have to go to meetings. I wake up, I work, I go for a run, and I work things out, and I come back and I type. I walk my dog and I write. I mean, that's what I do. That's what I like to do. So I mean, I think the early thing, it's just like getting to the ballpark early if you're an athlete. The guys who are really good, Michael Jordan used to get there early. Hank Aaron used to get to the ballpark early. It's what you do. Sometimes you need to breathe for a while before work, before you swing the bat, so to speak. And you just need to soak in the residue and the memories and the legacy of where you are. And in a tangible way, it's worked for me because throughout a fairly decent portion of my career, the chief creative officer, the ECD, whatever they were at the time, was also an early bird. So it allowed me to have kind of unstructured time, or just some kind of community with someone who I might not even exchange words to. It might just be, hey, Steve, how you doing? You jamming, right? Yeah. And it might just be this kind of almost like spacewalk tethering with another human being that is kind of important, I think.
Would that have been Steve Hayden when you mentioned Steve?
Well, both Steve Hayden and Steve Simpson were, I mean, Simpson was an earlier bird than Hayden, but, Steve Hayden, for a creative department was in pretty early, and he always knew he could call, I'd be at my desk at 8:30 if he needed something.
So, George, it's funny, by the way, Chip says, when I was much younger, I got into the office by 6 a.m. and was done working by the time anyone else came in, because my boss told me I needed to stop, so I didn't cause problems for others by doing too much. That's so crazy. And I remember being at Ogilvy, and there was so much pressure to stay late.
Yes.
If you left before 8 o'clock, you clearly were not ambitious. You clearly didn't take your job seriously. And I remember my mom came from South Africa, and she sat in my office. This broke my heart. I'll never forget this night as long as I live. And I was running up and down to GSI, to the mail room, doing this, tearing magazine, tear sheets to do a competitive analysis. And I left that night. It was the first night that she was in New York, all the way from South Africa. We left together at 10:45 p.m. And it just broke my heart that I couldn't just leave early. And she just sat there and she smiled, and she never said a word, and she never complained. But there was such pressure to put in the hours. It was bragging rights. I worked 60, 65 hours, 70 hours a week.
Yeah. I mean, it's the corruption of, I mean, certainly with Ogilvy, where if you've worked there any amount of time, you feel that David, David, and if you're someone who takes the Ogilvy brand seriously, which it was hard not to do for a while, you knew that was counter to what he believed an agency should be and how people should work. Most people now, at least most people who have any knowledge of neuroscience will tell you, A, the brain needs a chance to recover, and B, that it does really important work when you're not working. And it does less important work when you are working. And, I know it's kind of an advertising, fantasy that you dream ads, but I've always kind of woken up with the copy written. And by the time I get to work, what I would say to people would say to me, "You're so fast." And I would say, "No, you know what? I just don't type until it's in my fingers." And it's that I've thought about it for 9 hours before it's a little bit of the old carpenter's adage, never measure twice, cut once. You don't start, well, in the old days, filling up the walls with paper until you have something to say. So, the staying late thing is a shibboleth of people who are cowardly or just who hate to go home, or both.
That's true.
Everyone in advertising is insecure. I was about to say insincere. That was Freudian. Everyone is insecure, but is an insecurity written on a really malevolent level, because you're forcing other people to abide by that too.
It's interesting, by the way, even contrasted at the other end of the extreme is Tim Ferriss and the 4-hour work week, which is the other end of the extreme. But so something has been gnawing on me, which is one of your fun facts, which is I'm not as mean as I look. And I was thinking to myself, he's not as mean as he looks. This guy looks pretty damn mean.
There's a reason for that. Let me tell you, I'm an exceedingly nice person, and I'm excessively generous. So in this world we live in today, where I'm a very, very, very shy person, but social media makes it so you're not. I might get 15 or 20 calls a week. Can you talk to me? I feel like you're my dad. I feel like I have so much to learn from you. And if I make myself really approachable, it will eat me alive, because it's hard for me to say no. And so sometimes I put on that scowl, because if I don't, I'll never have any peace. I don't do it with my children or my wife, or, people who know me well know me, but, it's a little bit of a defense mechanism, because, as opposed to the days of yore, also known as civilization, when we had offices, there's no how do I say it? There's no semiotic hierarchy in offices anymore, where there might have been at one time hallways that you were quiet on, or offices that you were afraid to go into. That stuff was important. That stuff was protective. It's gone. You can be typing a mile away, and people will stand over your shoulder and interrupt you in mid-sentence. It's the propriety is pretty much vanished. It would be as if you were on an airplane pre 9/11, and you just went into the pilot's cockpit and said, "Hey, what you doing? What's that little button?" We don't do that, but we do in agencies. Anything goes.
But it also it opens up a whole interesting avenue to explore, which is that, in fact, yesterday, it's just funny how things. I had Michael Farmer on, and we were actually talking about the age, the state of the agency, and I said, well, what would happen? Why don't we go back to the good old Mad Men days? Minus the misogyny and
right.
And womanizing. And he said, well, actually, that's a pretty good idea. But the thought is that sometimes, whether it's hierarchy or parochial, or having divisions or distinctions or lines or a framework in place that separates and divides is not always a bad thing. And I think that's the point you're making, which is sometimes it's good to know your place, and it's good to be able to have a place, as opposed to everything goes and, just this whole mosh pit of togetherness.
If you when COVID's over, if COVID's over and you decide to visit your doctor, just for a checkup, you'll have your checkup. They'll poke and prod, and then if your doctor's of the old school, he'll probably or she'll probably call you into her office, and you'll have a 5-minute chat how everything's going. That's how my doctor appointments always were. And you sit there and you go, okay, well, that's good. I like that. But what I realized about 25 years ago was that my doctor wore a jacket and tie and a lab coat. Now, there's no reason for him to be wearing a lab coat. He's not mixing chemicals. He's not in a lab. He's basically sitting behind a desk, looking at an EKG or listening to your heart, taking your pulse. He's not really, he's not going to get splashed. He doesn't need a lab coat.
Yeah.
But there's a semiotic thing that says, I am in this field. And because we're basically animals, we've been trained to have all these same way. If we see a cop in uniform with a badge, I don't care what your feeling is about the police. You stand up a little straighter. If you're laughing, you quiet it a little bit. That's the way it goes. And most of humankind has existed that way. There was always a language to dress and appearance and accoutrements that has somewhat vanished. And the kind of leveling of the office, I understand it from an economic point of view, but they were never honest about it, because honesty and holding companies don't match. But it was always, I was going to streamline communication, and then everybody works with noise canceling headphones. And it was always about economics. It was always about getting more people into less space. So just be honest with that, and we'll be fine. But when they start this subterfuge that it's going to make creativity better, come on, that just pisses people. People aren't that dumb.
So I have to ask you one more question just about this idea. Clearly, you're not as mean as you look. Now we've figured out the secret to you, that you are a puppy. But did you intentionally scare the suits? Did you have, like, in your time at Ogilvy? Because I remember I feared and respected the creatives, and I started at Ogilvy as a suit. I loved the creatives. I loved coming near them, but I also knew that I wasn't one of them. Did you kind of play that up a little bit, or how approachable were you?
I think actually I don't think, maybe I was scary because I'm 6'2" and big and a little peremptory. But I don't think I was ever, like, nasty to people. And so, 95 times out of 100, I was pretty flexible about, time, and never really got flustered or stomped my feet, because I understand what kind of business this is, that clients make demands, and it's not just an account person being, a dick, if I'm allowed to say that, a jerk. So I don't think I was ever I was never shouty. I was never, the only time I really got pissed is if I felt, I used to have this phrase, hit me, but don't shit me. Like, if somebody was trying to shit me to do something, and they had 14 excuses till Sunday, I said, you know what, just tell me what you need to have done, and we'll work it out. But don't try to, there's a big thing, and Maria's going to be away, and so we have to get it before Joe comes back, and Jill wants this, and
I love that. Hit me, don't shit me. By the way, Tom Morris is loving you. He says, well, honesty and holding companies don't mix, another great Georgism. And then he said, I'm having a hard time keeping up with writing down all the great Georgisms today. I think many viewers are having insight Georgisms. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say that within the word Georgism is the word orgasm. So
Of course.
I mean, it was meant to be. First
I
time
think
I've
I
ever
was
mentioned
named
that
after an
word
orgasm.
in 200 episodes. First time I've mentioned that word. But George, Chief George Officer, the most uncanny way that we connected, and it was actually through your brilliant blog, Ad Aged, where you wrote a post called "I Bagel to Differ," where you spoke about wanting to potentially open up a bagel shop, a la H&H, or in the spirit of H&H. And I just loved the three. You came up with three names, and those three names were From Schmear to Eternity, Ruth Bagel Ginsburg, and Whole Foods. I'm not sure which one I voted for, but maybe we'll leave that out and see what people think. Would you vote for From Schmear to Eternity, Ruth Bagel Ginsburg, RBG, or Whole Foods? I will reveal the answer shortly. What's going on right now with your plans to open up a bagel stall?
Well, here's a confession, Joe. When you write a blog, as I have since 2007, I think, pretty much every day since 2007, so something close to 6,000 posts. I haven't really missed a working day since 2007. And I haven't had that many things where I'll repost. So I've probably done more posts than days over the last 13, almost 14 years. Sometimes you just goof off and do something silly because I know I can get 10 or 12 or 15 posts out of it, and it's kind of fun. And so I'm up here because of COVID in what I call the Gingham Coast of Connecticut. It's a little sterile, and you really can't get a good bagel. And I guess I was kibitzing with my wife, and I was like, I should open up a bagel shop. And it was right around the time, it's a horrible thing, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and I said something like, "Oh, I'll call it Ruth Bagel Ginsburg." It's funny, we laughed. And then, it evolved from there. And then I realized, well, gee whiz, this is funny. I did one of those Twitter surveys, and I got a ton of responses. And I just wrote a couple blog posts. I stopped. I had potentially 10 blocked out, but I stopped because so many people believed it. And I had enough readers where people in the area, and I don't know anyone in the area. I know our neighbors down the block because my wife is friendly. I don't know anyone in the neighborhood. I don't have any friends in the area. People started calling me and saying, I'm going to come for the grand opening.
I'm coming, by the way.
And I got it was a little Dr. Frankenstein, like what kind of monster have I created here? And so I was going, I know how to tread the line and make fake seem like real. I've been doing this for a long time, and I had this whole thing, construct made, and then I just pulled back because it got to be a little frightening for me, and I got a little timid about, and I don't usually get timid about this kind of thing, but about disappointing people. And then a friend, a very, very bright woman, I worked with her at RGA. She's out at Apple in Cupertino now in a pretty senior position. And she sends me a note the other day. How's the bagel shop going? And I'm like, oh shit, I have to tell her I have to apologize for weaving this kind of fiction. And I feel guilty. So, I had to let her down. I had to let her down, and I felt bad. So I pulled back.
So Chip Griffin, who is our resident copywriter here, on the show. He said he got himself into such a pickle, he should have opened a deli instead. Don't quit your day job, Chip. But let me put everyone out their misery and show everyone how the voting went. It looked like Whole Foods won by a margin of, 1 in every 2 votes. And there were 32,000 votes. I mean, that's crazy. Talk about getting yourself into a pickle.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So I felt like it got away from me a little bit, but it was funny. It's funny.
It's funny.
And
it brought us together, which is the craziest.
Yeah. And I could have like pushed it if I knew Photoshop. I could have built a shop and a sign. I could have done this.
So now, you know what goes well with bagel? Nutella spread the happy. That's my fake sponsor, basically. For the show.
Okay.
But
that's funny because my friend Joe, who's a producer, another friend Joe, who's my ex-producer at Ogilvy, his son plays, Pee-wee hockey or whatever. And Joe goes to all the games and I guess narrowcast them because of COVID. Parents can't go. So he asked me to write a bunch of promotions for him. And I didn't even think about it. I just typed out some things. So I was on Facebook on the weekend and I guess I was flipping by his thing and I heard him say, "Hey, after the game, stop by Old Saybrook's Own from Schmear to Eternity." And I had made up a few sandwiches, like, named after famous people. So we had from the cast of from the movie From Here to Eternity. So the one he mentioned was the Ernest Borgnine, a 9-inch bagel topped with a full pound of ham. So it became, yeah,
it's fun. And look, we're talking about the power of words, and and one thing about growing older and getting old is that I don't think your ability to come up with words and put words together in phrases and even sentences, I'm not really sure that physically you slow down on your ability to be punny, or more importantly, to make someone laugh and get someone's attention. And I want to emphasize some of your words because
you're also less afraid. So you have a little more ballast, a little more belief in yourself.
Now, I wonder whether this idea of being less afraid comes, how much of it is getting older, as in I've lived my life and I have less to lose, or how much of it now for you is being independent. And before you answer that question, we haven't even gotten into it, but I'm just going to scroll through as you're answering the question. I'm going to scroll through a bunch of things. What was interesting, George, if I'm correct, is that you wrote this post while you were still at Ogilvy. And you actually said in that Ogilvy font, right? I'm tired of being excoriated for being old, and also for using words like excoriated, which I had to go and look up as well. But you do this, and then, unbeknownst to you, you are cast aside or let go by Ogilvy. And I'm just going to show a few of these unbelievably poignant and brilliant pieces of copy that you've created. And I think, my God, you're not a David. You're a Goliath who actually acts like David, which is like, that's the real deal. The real deal is when you are big and scary and bulky, and you are agile and nimble and playful and mischievous and impish as well. So going back to my question, how much of this zest for life is based on getting older, which is a new thought, I think, and how much of it is now being an independent? And the backdrop of that is you leaving Ogilvy or Ogilvy leaving you.
Well, I think they're intertwined. Without sounding incredible, it's hard not to sound a little bit arrogant with your kindness, but a friend of mine, I knew my days at Ogilvy were numbered just because I'm old, and I don't know if cantankerous is the right word, but I'm not quiet. I have a brand. And, what people started saying to me is, your brand is bigger than Ogilvy's brand. And, that was very threatening to them. And, I actually thought they would be afraid to fire me. They probably should have been. It probably would have been worth their while to just keep me on payroll. Because I think, when they let me go, it deflated their brand worth a little bit. And I'm not trying to sound like an asshole, but, I think I've, after all these years, I realized, I'll tell you a story. I have to back up a few years. I'm 63 now. I got fired at RGA when I was 56. It's not unusual to get fired in the business. It's not unusual to get fired when you're 56. It's not unusual to get fired at RGA. It's just not, it's just what happens. But when you're 56 and you get fired in the ad industry, you realize you're kind of staring down the barrel of a gun. You might not work again full time. And I had my moments of tears and fear. And I said, how am I going to get a job? And I said to myself, well, this takes a little soul searching. And the way you're going to get a job, because there's no shortage of 56-year-old ex-copywriters or 46-year-old or 66-year-old, is how do you distinguish yourself? You say, well, what do I do better than anyone else in the world? And the only thing you can really answer that with is, well, I'm better at being me than anyone else in the world. And me is kind of loquacious, intelligent, hardworking, funny, irreverent, whatever. Hardworking being the main thing. And then I have the ability to take a shitload of information and boil it down pretty quickly. Because most of those headlines you're showing, there's a lot of, if I may say, there's a lot of depth to them, and I get them down to 9 words or whatever. I mean, that's what a copywriter does. And if you can do it with a smile or a nudge or something like that, you're doing okay. So what I realized was I can do things that a lot of creative people can't. And that's what I have to sell. And, I quickly, within 3 or 4 months of being let go at RGA, I got picked up by Brian Collins at Collins, who was housed within our Ogilvy at the time. And then I got shared between Ogilvy and Brian. And then, I was able to work for both places for a while because they were loosely affiliated at the time. And then Ogilvy offered me a full-time job on my dream job, really, on IBM, working for Simpson, who's, a brilliant creative leader. So, that became kind of a pretty good affirmation that I must be doing something right. And then, towards the end of my time, not the end times, but the end of my time at Ogilvy, I got called in to help work on Boeing that had a couple of crashes. And, I looked around and I said, well, who else in the industry could do this? I can sit with CEOs, I can sit with CEOs within Ogilvy and do this work. And it's kind of thankless. It's not like going to make, it's not like a Super Bowl ad where it's going to make people laugh, but it's pretty important stuff because you have a company that does $68 billion worth of sales, and they're in a lot of trouble and they don't know how to be self-effacing and honest. And I can do that. And that's a rare skill. And, so that's what I do. And, they fired me and then dangled, well, maybe we'll bring you back on Boeing. No one knew about COVID then. But the point is, it helped me coalesce who I am and what I do differently. And that helped my head space. And today, I get a lot of clients, and I call them the dump truck assignments. They have a certain amount of sales. They're not tiny clients, but they kind of come to me with 12 decks, and they say, we don't know who we are. We don't know how to talk. We don't know what we sell. And can you help us? And, they're not big enough to go to a traditional agency, or, maybe they would, but I kind of feel like traditional agencies have gotten out of the habit of being able to do what a lot of clients are asking me to do, which is help them figure out who they are.
Well, the question initially I was asking was almost about not, being less fearful, more fearless, less concerned about what other people say, more fierce. But really, we began this conversation talking about the idea of enthusiasm.
Right.
And I found this quote that I wanted to attach to our conversation today.
Okay.
And it says, nobody grows old merely by living a number of years. We grow old by deserting our ideals. Years may wrinkle the skin, but to give up enthusiasm wrinkles the soul. And that was said by Samuel Ullman, who was an American businessman, poet, humanitarian, and religious leader. So that was the quote that I wanted to attach to you. So forget about the fearless part. Forget about the not giving a crap. Let's talk about enthusiasm.
Right.
Is it getting older that has made you more enthusiastic, or is it being independent, or is it a combination of both?
I mean, I think I've always been an enthusiastic person. I think what the holding company system has allowed to have, now, I'll tell you a story. I'm not going to get the dates right, but between the 17th century and pretty much the middle of the 18th century, for about 150 years, there was no pay raise among the rank and file in the British Navy. So you probably know what impressment was and all that, where they would get guys drunk and then, in bars, and then drag them onto a ship for 5 years, and they couldn't get off. That's because they didn't raise wages. And what's happened is, in my opinion, and I'll get to enthusiasm, is that the linkage between hard work and prosperity is broken. And what I have now is a linkage between hard work and prosperity, and hard work and I have the ability, because I'm busy, to choose who I want to work with. So I've hired one full-time employee, a woman I've worked with for on and off for 25 years. And when I hired her, we were friends. When I hired her, I called her up and I said, Hillary, I need you to be my mensch meter. I need you to see if people present as schmucks, if you don't like them because you've got a good sense, you're an account person, you've got a good sense of people's humanity, and you can be a little divorced from the money. But if you don't like them, I don't want to work with them. And agencies can't do that. And, there's a real sadness there, because I think that drums everybody down. And there's also, I think it's hard to be enthusiastic if the prevailing mood in the company is you're an interchangeable part, you're quote unquote owned by a client, and there's no path for advancement. It's hard to know what your rise over run is. So, I think, the system is an enthusiasm destroying system. I think the people that who are successful within the system have somehow gained a certain amount of success, or are innately people who love what they do. Most creative people I've found out, or good creative people I've found out, one, they like solving problems. They inherently like solving problems. Creative could be account or planning or production. They like solving problems. And two, they genuinely, they're generous. So they give of themselves, and sometimes to a fault, which goes back to your question earlier. Why do I say I'm not as mean as I look? But if you don't start saying no, you'll be killed.
So I was looking at a comment that said George is terminally enthused. Terminally enthused. I guess that's a compliment, but but you know what I mean. Listen, if we don't embrace our mortality, then we are deluding ourselves. I
have to tell you a story. When you were reading that quotation, I grew up, in a different era. And one of the advisors to probably every president from Roosevelt, every Democratic president anyway, from Roosevelt through Johnson, was a financier called and scholar called Bernard Baruch. And there's a legendary story that has him in Washington at the age of 93 or 94. Someone sees him on a park bench, maybe a reporter, and they start talking to him. And they say, what are you reading? And he says, I'm studying Latin. And he was studying Latin at the age of 93 because he loved learning. And I mean, I'm not a religious person at all. I don't believe in a higher power, but I do believe there are people who are blessed because they love learning. They love, the game. They love the challenge. They love, horizons, and they're lucky that way, and I'm lucky that way. I was as Lady Gaga said, I was born that way. Did I get a popular culture reference?
Just hold on. My imaginary producer has just confirmed, yes, it was Lady Gaga. You have now made the connection between yourself, Kevin Bacon, and Lady Gaga.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Like staring in a mirror, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
Larry David.
I'll tell you something weird. My cousin was Lady Gaga's personal trainer for many years. So there you have it.
It was meant to be on Flannel Day.
Yeah,
George. I don't mean to, as a good suit, kissing the arse of a creative.
No,
but I have to tell you, when I see this stuff, it actually makes me think back to the original Ogilvy on advertising. It is the first time that I've actually seen a connection. It has the same zest, the same spark. You've clearly embodied David's catapult or slingshot. It makes me think back to Lemon. It makes me think back to the great print ads, because the great ads were print ads, and they were all exemplified and by copy. And it makes me realize that this idea of being that everyone, in fact, has the potential to be the world's largest one-person shop. I mean, you said a quote that you said, "I'm better at being me than anyone else in the world." Ain't that the truth? When we're always comparing ourselves to other people, but ultimately, when we stare at when we stare at ourselves in the mirror, no one can be better than being ourselves than ourselves. And it's just it's a great lesson to look within and dig within and find that zest for life, and that meaning of life. And I think that's what you found in this iteration.
Maybe it's also, I have two grown children, the adults, and seeing their kind of fortitude in facing the world and, the travails of making it as a parent, you try to make it easier for them, and you try to impart a little bit of what you learned. They're still going to have to learn it, but you can help with some notes. And I think that where so much of life is kind of, just to use a metaphor, is pressing the send button. And you say, all right, well, this is the best I can do. I'm pressing the send button now. And I mean, I have to do that this afternoon. I have deliverables due to clients, and, I can be really anxious about it, and because it's creative and it's me, and I don't have anyone to look at it and tell me how great it is. And I don't want anyone to do that. And I have to send it. And you just have to kind of go, well, I did the best like Joe Louis, the boxer, said, I'd done the best I could with what I had. And that's all you can do. Yeah, there he is.
See, I had that one.
That's
I had that one hidden.
Yeah. 49-1, right?
I had that one hidden for you. I loved it. I think he did okay, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think you've done okay. I forgot to mention, because we were a little bit rushed in coming in, that normally I give this to people, and they look at the Corona question, which I ask all my guests this week, and it's generally a tough one, but I feel that putting you on the spot is going to be okay, because you were in the business of ideas. And the Corona question this week is, what's the single best idea that you've ever come up with in your life?
Wow. You know what? I think actually I just said it, which is, it's two parts, and it's not. Do you mean an advertising idea or an idea?
No, answer it any way you want.
Okay. I learned two things in life, and this is all like of a piece, and all the product of, I mean, literally, I was half joking when I said I'm on a stamp, but I've been in therapy my whole life for whatever reason. But I learned two things, basically. Number one is, if you've done your homework, your good is other people's great. If you're hard on yourself, if you're demanding of yourself, your good is other people's great. So you can kill yourself, or you can press the send button. So when I was at Ogilvy twice, the first time during its heyday from 99 to 2004, then I took 10 years off from Ogilvy and came back from 2014 to 2020, to almost 2020 to 2021, I guess, technically. The first time I was in the agency for about 3 weeks. I had no partner. I knew no one. I hardly knew my way to the men's room. And for whatever reason, Steve Hayden picked me out of the bunch and said, we've got a problem. I need you to fix it. And he hands me an assignment, a commercial that was a failure. And he says, I need you to write some commercials. And, I'm writing for Steve Hayden. I'm completely intimidated. The copywriter, the president of Ogilvy on IBM, and the author of the world's most famous commercial, Apple's 1984. And I'm intimidated as shit. I don't have a friend in the place. And I went in on a weekend, and I had this assignment, and I wrote 50 scripts. And it's Sunday night, and I'm tired, and I want to go home, and I don't want to send them because they might suck. And I said, you know what? I got to press the send button. And I pressed the send button, and it all worked out. I mean, within kind of minutes, I got a gushing email, and, some praise and some orders to do more, but mostly praise. And, that was a lesson in there that you just, especially for the 99.99% of people who don't have a fundamental belief in themselves, the lesson is, believe. And if you don't really believe, do some things that act like you believe. And that doesn't mean puff out your chest and boss people around. That means come in and write 50 commercials And then you press the send button. And I was lucky enough to work for someone like Steve who understood the trauma that I went through, and to respond with praise and constructive criticism. And after that, I mean, not to be too mafiosa about it, but I was a made man at Ogilvy. And, you know, fast forward ahead a month, I'm shooting commercials and I'm in a van with Steve and, you know, the woman who, Susan Westra, who was described to me as, you know, the world's best television art director. And I'm going out to shoot with them. And Steve got a call, you know, from the client, 7 a.m, and they killed the spot we're about to shoot. And he turns around in the van and he hands me his IBM ThinkPad. I had never typed on a PC before, and says, "We need to write a new spot here." And I'm in a van, like sitting on a wheel well, you know, jostling through the city. And I got to write a new spot. I don't even know how to work the computer. And I don't want to say to him, I don't know how to work on the computer, because I'm a group creative director in IBM, and I should know. So, you know, I figured it out, and I wrote a spot, and, you know, I hand it to him, like, you know, shaking. I hand him the computer. There's no printer in the van. And he goes, "Yeah, this is good. Okay." And that was that. But, you know, that's, sometimes you have to kind of, you know, it doesn't matter how old you are. You know, you write things down on an index card, whether it's real or metaphorical, and you have to remind yourself. And I have to remind myself of that almost every time I send something to a client. And, you know, because it's most creative people aren't brimming with confidence. They think what they did sucks. And it doesn't matter who you are. I was with Errol Morris shooting, and I'm not dropping names, shooting when Wormwood was reviewed in the New York Times. And in the opening paragraph, if I remember correctly, the review was gushing. The opening paragraph, the reviewer compared it to Citizen Kane. And Errol, who's at this point, you know, he's 10 years older than I am and has had 40 years of success, is like, he's pinching himself, like, "See, I'm really good." It's as if he's talking to his harridan of a mother. "See, Mom, I don't suck." Because we all, you know, imposter syndrome, which is very au courant now, is nothing new. We all suffer. The original cavemen, when they were out killing mammoths, there's no way I can kill that. All I have is a piece of wood, and that thing weighs 30 tons. I can't kill that. And they worked it out, you know, but all of us are afraid of failing. And, you know, so I know I answer questions, I don't answer questions quickly because they're usually complex for me. But I think the biggest idea is to kind of like, it's a combination of trying to find some semblance of confidence and to be Yiddish about it. What's the worst that can happen? I mean, after Ogilvy, what's the worst that can happen? They've stripped me of my career, my identity, and my paycheck. What more can anyone? The holding companies can't hurt me. And I might be, I mean, I'm saying this sarcastically, of course, but I have a better account roster than Ogilvy, New York. So, guys.
I know, and by the way, when you look at the state of the agency world, it's just incredible. George, I should have mentioned, by the way, that the first of all, Adam John said, "Great story, thank you, George Tannenbaum." I forgot to mention that the answer for the Corona question is meant to be in 30 seconds or less. But no, I'm kidding. Okay. I'm kidding. But I'm
a long form guy.
I you know what? Nobody said this was. Nobody said I needed a tweet response. I hate that. I hate having to when words matter, and as you say, words can be good writing as a business advantage. It has been a privilege to hang out with the Chief George Officer of GeorgeCo. We are actually going to spend a little bit more time together in the Zoom after show. If you guys want to join us, just type bit.ly/CoronaTV after show, and you will get into our little after show. Check out George's incredible blog, Ad Aged. It's amazing. And look at this new lease on life, the power of independence. GeorgeCo is bigger than Ogilvy, New York. It has a better client roster than Ogilvy, New York. Just go to GeorgeTannenbaum.com. Follow George on the Twitter, connect with him on LinkedIn. But most importantly, if you do end up working with him, you will end up working with him and you will not be baited or switched. So George, we're going to go ahead and go over.
Do I stay where I am?
No, you just have to type bit.ly in. I'll guide you through it. Okay. But most importantly, someone has been waiting patiently just to let you know what he thought of you and the show. And that is the Grand Warden, Mr. Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
There you go. He's not going to come after you, so you're like.
Okay. So am I supposed to type?
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV after show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at coronatv.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.